Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to episode 70 of the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. We hope everyone had an amazing 4th of July, Independence Day, right? I like to say that so everyone really understands what we're celebrating on the 4th of July. And I hope that everyone celebrated the freedoms that we hold dear in this great republic. And we've picked up so many new subscribers and listeners. So I'm going to reintroduce myself here and my co-host, Ron Ward. I am Kristin Sokoloff. Sometimes to make it easy on folks, I say Sokoloff. That's the Americanized version. We have Ron Ward here, best-selling author and co-host.
Oh, wow.
I know you wanted me to say my hero. But
I did before we were recording. I did try to slip that in to get Kristin to read my hero, Ron Ward, but it didn't work. So it's a good try.
I know. It was a good try. So I know he had notes on here. My amazing co-host, Ron Ward. I mean, what's new? He's always slipping little things in here to prop him up a few more. And you deserve it, Ron.
She didn't take the bait. She didn't take the bait.
Oh, goodness. Good
so,
times.
Kristin, we talk a little bit about our sponsor, that is Forward Operations. I'm the CEO of that. You are heavily involved. And it's very exciting because we now have Forward Media Company under the umbrella of Forward Operations. We're calling it to be hip and cool 4MC. And we launched 2 days before we're recording and got a contract the next day. And we have more that are out there. So if anyone needs web design, media services, social media, video editing, which most media companies don't offer, listen, we are your one-stop shopping. So you can get leadership training, executive coaching, and media services all under one umbrella.
Yeah.
Number 4, operations.com. How was that for a commercial, Kristin?
That was amazing,
Was
Ron.
it scrappy?
It was scrappy. Hey, we both took our episode regarding being scrappy. It was, are you scrappy? We both took that to heart and we're going to become more scrappy. So what a great episode. We've received so much positive feedback about it. And we really are trying to live out exactly what's covered in that episode. So what did we do? Like a 60-day, we're going to be really scrappy for 60 days and then reflect on statistics, right? And see where we landed with stats and so much more. So I challenge everybody to do that.
Yeah, if you work with someone else, challenge them. The next 60 days, we're going to a higher level. We're going to communicate more effectively. We're going to go after leads. We're going to nurture leads. We're going to close leads. And Chris and I we made a pact for 60 days. We're increasing our marketing and we're going to see what happens. We'll let you guys know.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like boots on ground marketing. We're out there. I have flyers, bringing them out to the events that I've done, handed them out at the family reunion I just went to, random places, right? That's being scrappy. You got to utilize every opportunity you have.
It sure is. All right, let's delve in. Kristin, this is another listener suggestion. And the question was about, how to help coworkers and managers to coworkers set boundaries at work. And I thought, man, is that a great topic?
Oh, yeah, it is.
We've done some other ancillary topics, but not like this. So before that we start unpacking this, it is vital that both managers and employees know their personality, because you can talk all you want about boundaries, but if it's not a reflection of your personality and your values, you will not set the boundary. What do I mean by that? A person with tendencies to be a people pleaser, that's an insecurity. We've talked a lot about childhood programming. That's an insecurity that many times comes from childhood, and they are afraid to set boundaries. They're never going to say no. They're never going to tell someone, you've invaded my space or whatever that is, because they're too insecure. You got to go to the root problem, start working on that insecurity if you're really going to set a boundary. Of course, the opposite happens with people who are driven. They don't set boundaries because they feel like they're making excuses or a crutch. So they're going to be 100 miles an hour all out because it's attached to their ego. So anyway, Think about your own personality and start to get rid of some of those issues so that you can set healthy boundaries at work. Kristin, have you ever seen people who have no boundaries?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's wild. We're talking about the workplace here, but we see that play out almost every day, I can imagine, in personal lives as well. And then when I think about boundaries, there's physical boundaries also. There's emotional, where people are prying and they're getting into your business. There's so many things non-physically, but then you also have physical boundaries, the close talker, right? Like, I don't know about you, Ron, but for me, if I put my arm out straight, that's about where I need somebody to be. And it's funny how some people, excuse me, you could take a step back and they will follow you. And there's that physical boundary that can be very disastrous for somebody in the workplace. If you're not aware that you're, say, a close talker, that's going to turn a lot of people off. And I've dealt with that type of person so many times in the workplace. And that is a tough one to address. I don't know about you, Ron. I have never, I'm going to be completely transparent. I've addressed boundary issues, but I've never addressed a physical boundary issue in the workplace.
Chris and I have a couple things. I did have to address a physical boundary in the workplace. It was very uncomfortable. I had an assistant who, with lack of a better term, was an older lady. She was just nosy. She was always trying to read my computer, look at my planner.
Wow.
And one time I had to tell her she would come around my desk. Like if we're looking at something on the computer and I had a pretty big screen, she could see it, but she'd come around my desk, and that's fine if we're reading something, but she would put her crotch on my elbow.
Oh
Now,
my goodness.
it was not, I promise you, if you
It's
knew
like the
situation,
hairdresser leaning into you, right? That kind of situation.
Yes, it was not. I don't think she was being forward or anything
No.
else. I think she had a lack of understanding about boundaries. So
Right.
finally, there was something happened, though, that prompted it. And I literally told her, this is an invisible line. Do not come across this line around to my desk again. But basically what happens, I walked in and caught her looking at my planner.
Oh, wow.
And this is someone who would literally get, I guess, insecure, jealous. If I was meeting with someone else, she would come in, she would move her head trying to see what we were.
Oh my goodness.
It was really, so, when this person retired, let's just say I didn't cry, Kristin. Let's say I didn't cry.
Celebratory. Well, so that's a physical. So you've addressed a physical, and that is awkward. I've definitely addressed where I've had employees, like it's a tough balance, because I had always wanted all my employees to be bought in, to be a part of the meetings, right? To be able to provide opinions and feel that they're truly valued. But what happens with someone that doesn't have that boundary built into them, because I really do feel like boundaries are something that either you have this ability to set these boundaries or you don't, and you can be coached on it, but it is very difficult for somebody to like, okay, now I understand, right? I've had to tell employees, you just crossed boundaries because you started interjecting when I was like pitching an idea, right? Like if you want to wait for me to give you the prompt to be able to then provide what you feel is a solution or a different idea, right? Like, so don't take over the meeting. You're going to add to it, but you need to wait. So it's just this lack of overall boundaries that can be very troublesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because many people don't realize that's a boundary. But when you say you don't want to be interrupted, you are setting those invisible boundaries. And that's, a psychological boundary, verbal boundaries. You should always, as a confident human being, have boundaries. And we're going to help you define those and help you hopefully navigate those and think about them more. But I wanted to throw in one free thing. And folks, you get this free for listening to this podcast. When we taught officer safety, but this can apply, if you're in the streets of a city or anywhere else, is you always keep your hands above your waist. That's giving you a barrier between you and someone else. It gives you a boundary. And also, even when you're communicating, we've talked a lot about communication, but the power zone is considered that place between your waist and your shoulders. And people who speak, even talk with their hands, we've joked about it, but they are perceived to be more powerful. So
Yeah,
if
baby.
someone is, yeah, I thought I'd get an amen there. Think about this, Kristin. Many times perpetrators are looking for a victim. So if I'm standing around slump-shouldered, my hands are in my pocket, they know they have a clean zone into my midsection or wherever. But if I'm standing, I'm alert, and my hands are above my waist, that's going to help deter someone from trying to attack me. So
Right.
everyone just think about that. It's your safety zone. It's a power zone, but make it a habit to keep those hands up to a certain extent, and it might prevent something bad from happening at some point.
Right. And this is a physical boundary, would you
It's
say?
that would be a
Yeah.
physical boundary.
Right,
That's right.
right. Yeah.
So,
There's so many forms of boundaries. I can't wait to dive into them all here.
Yeah, no kidding. So, Kristin, we mentioned in episode 65, it was titled Navigating Cliques in the Workplace. And we did talk about how people get cliquish and they create their own boundary, by the way, and you're not welcome in. It's
It's kind of like the top of a mountain. It creates its own weather system.
That's exactly right.
Right.
So with these cliques, you got boundaries, and unless they make an opening for you to join the clique, which we're not really in support of anyway, you can't come in. So I hope our listeners are starting to see there are numerous boundaries to navigate. So when I was, we've talked a little bit about what I dealt with. I did see people violating boundaries constantly, but one of the most, I guess, frequent boundaries was just people who overshare, people who get into other people's business. We've talked about oversharing, but the opposite is those people who ask questions that are inappropriate. They don't need to be asking those questions. And again, the listener has to set a boundary, or that's just going to keep happening.
Right.
So what else you got, Kristin?
I know. It's so funny. As you're saying that, I'm thinking about, I have a friend who I have a couple of them actually. And yes, I've known them for a long time. They have no problem asking financial questions like, how much did you pay for your house? How much equity do you have in your house? What's your monthly payment?
Don't you love those people?
Oh my, I can't help but laugh to myself because I'm like, I would never. And it's just wild to me, but I don't unfriend them because of it, but I just know what I'm getting with certain people, and they just don't have those boundaries. And that's something that I was raised with, like, you don't talk about finances at all. And I don't necessarily, we did a whole episode on financial, just being a little more brave with finances so that people hold you accountable. But so there's a complete lack of boundaries there for a lot of people. And so let me break down the three types. We've discussed physical boundaries, and also that could go off in many directions. We could even go into sexual harassment, right? Like there's a physical boundary, and there are ways for you to, which we have an episode about sexual harassment for those interested.
We do.
Then we have emotional boundaries, which we're starting to touch on here, and mental boundaries. So let's look at the first one here. And again, we've touched on it, but I want to dive a little deeper. Physical boundaries are going to relate to your physical workspace and your body, right? And that can be as benign as the close talker. It could be, if anyone's seen the Office episode where Dwight is going over, or Jim's going over into Dwight's space. So Dwight builds this like wall of sharpened pencils so that if he dare went over, it would like pierce him. I mean, it's just hysterical. So, but that would have been, say you do have desks slammed together and someone's crap is all coming over onto your desk. That is a violation of your boundaries, your workspace, right? So these rules establish your expectations for how people are going to interact with you. And they can often relate to space and touch. So examples of physical boundaries would include shaking someone's hand rather than hugging them. That happened to me. I was just in New York for a week. And in New York, I don't know about you guys in the South, Ron, but do you do the kiss cheek thing?
We don't. No.
Okay. So that's very, I guess, East Coast, right? So for me, when I was meeting people or even just seeing family, again, that I hadn't seen in years, I would go in for like a hug if I knew them, and they would go in to kiss my cheek. And it was very uncomfortable for me because I forgot. I actually felt bad because then I made it weird, right? So that's something. So and then I met somebody's dad and I went to shake his hand and he went to hug and do the kiss on the cheek, right? So there's so many things to factor in.
Yeah.
So,
and And
Yeah,
just
go
to
for it.
interject, I mean, I've done that a lot, but I usually I don't even know you, so it doesn't work very well for me.
Right.
You'll get that in a minute, Kristin. But go
You're
ahead.
like, so
They don't know me, Kristin. Get
I
it?
know you don't know. That's a great song, by the way. Another one, wearing headphones. I know Ron does this when he wants to be antisocial, wearing headphones to signal that you're busy, right? My husband does it at the gym. If I have my earbuds in, don't talk to me, right? And don't forget gray rocking. Again, we need to do a full-blown episode just on the gray rocking masterclass. And oh my gosh, my brother-in-law gray rocked my husband the other day. And I have to just say this. This is really funny because I go, he just gray rocked you. And he wouldn't have known what that was if we didn't do an episode on it. But my brother-in-law's sons, they all have like longer, shaggy hair, right? And that's kind of the thing right now. But I'm married to a police officer. He likes it high and tight, clean. And even though my son wants it a little longer, he has like a JFK haircut. Like he loves the JFK look. So my husband goes to his brother. He's like, hey, you guys have barbers in Maryland? Because that's where he lives. And he was like, yeah, do you? And he put it right back on my husband and he knew exactly, he's a psychologist. He knew exactly what my husband was doing and he didn't play into it. And then he just started talking about barbershops. And I was like, he just gray rocked your ass. I was like, good job. So anyways, that's gray rocking, right? So although we've talked about it, when there's a narcissist boss, you can establish boundaries. So a little more on gray rocking, it's simply ignoring someone in a passive way. I mean, that's what he did. He put it right back on him. Remember on the episode called My Boss is a Narcissist and we role played a scenario?
Yeah.
That was in the beginning.
Yeah, but I love the fact that I was saying, Kristin, I'm trying to make you look at my shirt. Kristin was like, I'm so not a gray rocker. She still wanted to compliment me, even in the role.
I know. I'm getting really good at it, though. You're so right. Because I am a nice person. And that's like my natural instinct is to make someone feel good about themselves. But we eventually got there.
You gray rocked me on the script when I said my hero, Ron Ward, when you were supposed to open with that. You're getting
better and better.
That's scary.
Oh my gosh. I gray rocked somebody recently when they were trying to get me involved in their divorce, a friend couple of ours. And they were trying to get us involved and I gray rocked him. My husband looked at the text. He's like, good job. I just didn't even acknowledge it. Right. So anyways, back to that. So yeah, you were the boss. You're trying to get me to brag on your shirt. I looked in your eyes and you're like, can you help me? And yeah, anyways, that was interesting. That's been quite the transition to go from just naturally complimenting somebody to understanding like you can't do that with a narcissist. And Ron, no, I'm just joking. Moving on. Anyhow.
So I'm going to cut people a little bit of slack, Kristin. We are very transient in the United States.
Yeah.
And a lot of people move maybe into a different state, maybe across the country for their job. Right. And that happened all the time at the Federal Law Enforcement Academy where I was. So it's very natural. You don't know anyone. Mm-hmm. So you're going to find a pal at work. And that became very natural. We've already, again, talked about it. So we won't get into the click part, but what I had to deal with was manager-employee type situations with no boundaries. Mm-hmm. So again, we understand if you've moved somewhere, but do your best to get into other social groups and try not to, especially if you're in a manager, try not to have favorites because it's going to diminish your leadership. I guarantee it. Eventually, it's going to have a negative impact on your ability to influence your team and the organization.
Oh,
the next
one absolutely will.
Kristin mentioned this. It's emotional boundaries. And one of the things that we've talked about is emotional intelligence, and that's the ability to control your emotions. They help you separate your feelings from how someone else may feel without negating the need for empathy. In other words, you can't take on everybody's burden. Just like you said in this divorce situation, that was gray rocking. You kind of ignored it or some way you pushed it back.
Right.
So it's the same with emotions. People want you to accept their emotional baggage. And you just can't do that all the time. And sometimes you teach somebody a great lesson by not taking their emotional baggage. But
Right.
have you ever seen people, Kristen, they're in a bad mood, so they want you to be in a bad mood?
Oh, absolutely.
They
It's
really
very
do.
toxic.
There's an old saying called misery loves company, and it's so true.
It is.
Also, and especially from a manager standpoint, you need to learn to delegate work appropriately. There are some people you take on too much work just to show that you can do it or you're insecure, and then eventually it leads to burnout.
Yeah.
So I did put a chart in my book. I did write my book for new and aspiring managers, but I think this might apply to anyone, but since it's only 5 steps, I'm going to mention it quickly.
Yeah.
One question you ask yourself, is this the best use of my time? Because there's some things that there's another subject matter expert, a SME, or maybe it's a staff assistant that could be doing it. So you need to ask yourself that. Number
Right.
2, to whom should I delegate the task? If it's a coworker, make sure it's something that they are amenable to and it's in their purview. You don't want to give them stuff. You're going to get a reputation.
Don't pass your SHIT off
Exactly.
on one of your peers. That
Yes.
will not go over well.
Does the employee have the authority to take over the responsibilities? Does the employee have the ability? You don't want to set someone up for failure.
Right.
And then does the employee have sufficient resources? And these are questions that I'd been using way before I wrote my book to help me delegate. And I was able to coach some other managers on that. They were doing things that were wasting their time that I need them operating on higher level stuff.
Right.
And they felt
right.
guilty delegating. And but delegation is a powerful force, and it is a form of a boundary.
Right. I think that is amazing feedback, just the delegation piece, because we've talked about that in past episodes.
I think so. And also talk to your colleagues, and it's okay to have a respectful conversation. We've talked about managing up. Have a respectful conversation with your manager on how they like to be communicated with, but also it's fine to mention how you like to be communicated with. Now, we don't want to get you in trouble. You can't usurp authority over your boss. Your boss wants communication, by phone, and you keep texting all the time just because you like it. Don't do that, but
Right.
find out. But it's okay to share how you like to be communicated with, especially to your coworkers.
Absolutely.
And then again, the negative feelings and negativity. Set a boundary. We tell you to go on a negativity diet. Set a boundary, imaginary boundary, that you just do not engage, embrace, entertain negativity.
Right. I have to just out myself on that. Because we were just in New York for a week and we stayed at 3 different places, and that is a lot when you have 2 kids that you're carting around with you. So I was getting, I don't know if it was anxiety or what, but before the trip, I was becoming quite negative about it already, and we hadn't even left yet. And I literally had to check myself because it was impacting my husband, because we were going back to visit his whole family. And I had to just say to myself, why are you being so negative about this? Like, that's pretty selfish, right? And so though I identified a few things that we'll do next or differently next time for our next trip, I also kind of identify why I was becoming negative. It was a little just anxiousness, right? And so I literally had to just pray, like, please help me not be this negative person. And I really felt much better, like, once we got there. But it just shows you, for anyone that hasn't, so many people have just like baseline anxiety, right? It's just the fear of the unknown. Like, you don't know how this trip's going to go. You don't know how the flight's going to go. I should update you on the rental car situation. Last episode, we empowered everybody to try to get a free upgrade. So mine did not work out so well. I'll just share this. We landed at 11 p.m. at JFK, and then we went to the rental car place, and oh my gosh, which one was it? I'm trying to think which one. I don't want to say the wrong one. It was a negative experience, so I don't want to say the wrong one. Let that come to me. But basically, they had, it's like that Seinfeld episode where all these people had made reservations, but they didn't have enough cars for everybody. So we, along with 10 other people at midnight at this time, were waiting for cars to be returned in the middle of the night so that they could flip them. So we waited for 2 hours for our rental car. It was 1 a.m. before we even, actually like 1:30 before we even got it. And so it was just insane. I didn't even, at that point, I didn't even go for the upgrade because they didn't have any cars to upgrade us to.
Kristin, we're going to be talking about hedgers in a minute. I don't want to get ahead, but
Oh my gosh.
I will tell you that I started to say something when you and I had that conversation before, that everything has changed post-COVID. And then you had the condensers or whatever they were that no one could get. So there was a car shortage. I had the same thing that I forgot to mention in Chicago. I waited for hours and I literally could not believe this. Chicago O'Hare is either the largest or second largest airport in America. And they told me, I mean, it was like a mom and pop shop. When I finally got a car, I was going to Iowa. I was speaking and they said, you will have to have it back on Wednesday by noon. Well, I was leaving it in Iowa and I had a flight.
Oh my goodness.
So I had to cancel one leg of my flight so that I could get up early in the morning and drive this rental car back to Chicago O'Hare Airport. So don't beat yourself up on that one.
Oh
Keep trying it. Is there any chance? Is there any chance? It works.
Oh yeah, I will.
But the airports,
I need redemption.
Yeah, the airports and rental cars it's just a mess.
Oh my gosh,
really
I was at their
is.
mercy for sure. I was willing to take like a tiny little Volkswagen Bug at that point. I'm like, we'll strap the luggage to the top. Just give us a freaking car.
Yeah.
But
no
yeah, so I will try it again and I will let you guys know how it goes. But with those negative feelings, like that was something I did not like seeing that come out of me. And so I think it's important that we all just pause and check ourselves and be like, why am I acting this way?
Kristin, I think it's cool that you acknowledge that because we're all human. We're not acting like we're not human. I get things that frustrate me, but believe it or not, in the adaptability quotient, we talk about IQ, EQ, but adaptability, we often talk about adaptability as though you're adapting to change. We think about, your company brings in a new software program and you have to adapt, or there's a new way of doing business. But adaptability actually comes in adapting to uncomfortable situations. And you do what you did. You're like, I recognize I'm not adapting here. And I'm frustrated. And you did the mental exercise. No one's perfect, Kristin, but you recognized it. And I'm sure, you adapted. So that is part when we talk about adaptability, and we also might do an episode on that because it's so important. Because I do a whole training on early adapters, late adapters. We won't get into that now. But that is part of adaptability. It's not just change. It's things we're uncomfortable with.
Right. And I'm glad you point that out. And I'll end it with this. It was tough because I started seeing my son and I are a lot alike, and he started being negative, and he was like, kind of like, yeah, mom, and then my husband was irritated, and I was like, this is like spiraling fast. So it's so important that we hold ourselves accountable to that. All right. So I'll move on to mental boundaries. This is the number 3 type of boundaries that we're going to discuss today. So mental boundaries, they support your mental energy and help you focus when you're working. So we did a whole episode on burnout, bore-out syndrome. This type of stuff it relates, right? It's like a cousin. So they typically relate to your opinions, thoughts, and values at work. And examples of mental boundaries include establishing the set hours you work. We've talked about that so much. You don't want to burn yourself out. You want to show yourself respect and not work outside of certain parameters unless you have a crazy deadline. Advising management on strategies for more efficient meetings. And that is when it is done in the right time and place. That is information your leadership should be coveting, really. Not gossiping with colleagues at work. Talk a lot about cliques. So that's really important. It's tempting. We all know that it's tempting to join in on that, but challenge yourself to stay apart from that. And setting messages on instant messaging to alert others that you're focusing. I 100% did that because we are trained when a message comes in, especially like an IM or an email, to respond. I'm going to click into the mic like that, right? So ASMR there for you folks. Ow, that one hurt. But we are trained to just respond. And even with text messages to like respond immediately. But at work, you can set something that automatically lets them know that you're basically out of pocket for the next 2 hours. Highly recommend.
The interesting part, Kristin, is if we set invisible boundaries, whether psychological, mental, whatever the boundary, if you do it repeatedly, people will actually recognize the boundary. If they know you're a time blocker and they know from 8 to 9, Kristin is going to knock out her emails. She's going to get all this stuff done. And Kristin has repeated that multiple times. We all start to know, don't bother Kristin from 8 to 9.
Right.
She's time blocking. And that's how boundaries, not only do you set boundaries, you have to have other people acknowledge your boundaries and see your boundaries. So that works together. So, Kristin, we have a lot of specifics. So maybe we can just kind of zip through these because we've hit the general concepts here of boundary setting. But let's touch on some of these and be very specific, but maybe brief, and we'll get through this. But this is really interesting stuff for me, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So first one I want to touch on here is setting priorities. Or setting priorities and boundaries. So in order to set these boundaries, you have to first consider what your priorities are, right? Like what are I like to say, what's the drop dead stuff? Like what do I absolutely have to get done? And then you can expand from there. You're working off of deadline, maybe you have daily tasks. So you have to set your priorities. It's very important.
Yeah, that's great. And understanding your workload, like you mentioned, if you have a project, people know if you keep a good schedule, you usually know ahead of time how work ebbs and flows. So you have to understand your workload for you, but to be able to set boundaries. If you're always surprised, like, oh, I didn't expect to get that, then that's when your boundaries are no good. So understand your workflow, understand the times of day. A couple of weeks ago, I know we're referring back. This is almost like a recap of our podcast episodes so far. We should have called this recap.
Seriously. I know. I'm like, sorry. I'm like, there's another one there. But it's awesome because we're touching on things and then folks can go dive into a full 45-minute segment on one topic that might interest them.
Yeah. And Kristin and I have said, honestly, I learn and I'm challenged. That scrappy one, I was telling Kristin a story before we got on that I was way more scrappy than usual. But when you understand your workload, I mentioned the coffee shop when it was bottlenecking in the drive-through. So they did some adjustment. We called it aces and spaces. And I laugh, Kristin, because I'm determined to get aces and spaces and jacks and cracks on, at least a T-shirt or something.
I like it.
But that's what understanding your workload is. It helps you set boundaries, because if you don't know what you're doing, the boundary's irrelevant.
Right. Absolutely. Another one, good timing here is taking time off. But I think, I just got back from New York and I mentioned we were jumping from place to place to place, visiting family. I think it's okay. I want to empower everyone. It is okay to feel like you need a vacation from a vacation. For me, I define what we just did as a visit. That was not vacate. I vacated my home, but I was grinding. I'm exhausted, quite frankly. I just got back last night. So we were going from place to place to place. I think it's really important to, when you do take time off, and you must take time off, you have to analyze what you're going to be doing within that time frame, and understand that when you get home, taking an extra day a lot of times is very needed. And it's okay to feel that way, and it's okay to take care of yourself that way.
You should factor that extra day in. And, already had a conversation about the 2-week vacation that wasn't possible for you, but try to work in a day of rest to recuperate. Communicate often. This is just, we talk, but communication is the breakdown that 95% of things, that complaints that we get, even when I'm dealing with leadership, it's all about communication. So if you communicate clearly, as I've said, if you express your boundaries, then people will adhere to that eventually. Also, I have never used this. We like to throw in some psychological terms. This will, if you've listened this far, you're going to be so glad, because we hear hedge and we think stock market, or we think trimming the hedge. But hedgers, if you look in English, hedgers are words that are not confident. And if you do an email, and by the way, in our executive coaching program, you're going to analyze an email and you're going to remove the hedgers. It's going to help you communicate so much more dynamically. Now, there are rare instances where hedges are important and hedging is important, like talking to your kids and things. But here's some examples of words that, generally speaking, you need to eliminate. It's stuff like possible, probably, likely, unlikely. If you're in a conference meeting and you're like, well, it's unlikely that we'll make this sale, or is it possible to try this? Those are words that you're hedging what you really mean.
Right.
And from an adverb standpoint, those were adjective. It's like conceivably, perhaps. That's probably the number one. Well, perhaps we could do it this way. People are trying to be nice many times, but you're just not making an impact.
Right.
And then from a noun, it's like assumptions, or there's a likelihood that this could come back and bite us, or possibility, probability. And then verbs, and here's the number one. Well, I just assumed, if we did it this way, nothing. And the breakdown of you make an ass out of you and me, that's been done for so many years, but it's still very true.
I love that.
The other one I like is, well, I believe it ain't about what you believe. Let's get some facts. So again, you can look up hedging, but I promise you, if you will practice removing hedgers in your day-to-day activity, unless it's necessary, it's going to make you an effective, powerful communicator.
We should put this in our show notes or do a whole episode on hedging.
I'm going to make a note right now.
Okay, because this is great.
Well, we've got some more stuff that ties in that we do in our executive coaching with hedging. So we'll do one of the two, but I am going to put some things in the show notes.
I think that'd be great. And the other thing is, Ron, if you could, because I know someone listening may be saying, okay, but you just said when you're at a car rental place to say, is it possible to, why is this different?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because they hold all the power. And I say, is there any chance like that? And you say it assertively, by the way. Now, here's how you could hedge that. I know this is probably impossible, but is there any chance? You don't do it that way. Right. You literally look someone in the eye and you go, is there any chance that you could upgrade me? I know you've got some other cars there. Sometimes you can add a little bit of assertiveness to it.
Yeah.
But that is a great point, Kristin. And the hedging comes in when you literally start off with a negative in that regard.
I like it. I wanted to follow up. It's funny because in our last episode, I was talking about it. When we were talking about this type of framing is when someone would come to me and they'd want their overdraft fees reversed. But there's a story that I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. And that was that this woman had asked if she could have her overdraft fees reversed. And she's really sweet. And she was a regular, came in all the time, had her kids with her, right? And I had reversed them for her in the past. And a lot of people don't know this, but bank managers have a scorecard and they have a really tight budget on reversing fees, right? So when you do it, it needs to make sense. So otherwise it negatively impacts your bottom line. So I reversed this gal's fees. I think it was like $33 overdraft fees, right? Reversed them. And even though I kind of in my gut was like, I shouldn't be doing this because she's had this happen numerous times. Within an hour, she was so thankful. Within the hour of me reversing these fees, an edible arrangement. Do you remember those? It's like fruit dipped in chocolate. She sends me an edible arrangement thanking me for reversing her fees. Those things are expensive. And I was like, son of a bee, you literally just spent $60 on an edible arrangement out of these fees that I just negatively impacted my scorecard to reverse for you because you were saying you had no money. Kristin, and so, oh my gosh, that one really irks me.
Chocolate covered strawberries. What were we talking about?
Literally, it's 15 years later, and I'm like, that is like the epitome of making bad decisions.
You mentioned framing because it does, there's, again, we're getting over in the executive coaching, but it is so interesting how someone can frame a situation. You talk to one person, and I learned this when I was a police officer early. You talk to this one person and you're ready to kill the other person. Then you talk to the other person and you're like, wait, that makes sense. Then you're ready to kill the opposite person. So the way you frame something, and also I just want to, for the hedgers out there, because I know people might be getting stirred up, Yes, if you know someone's personality and you need to be sweet and say possible, we're not saying eliminate it, but in most of your day to day, especially if you're in sales, if you need to get things done, hedgers will usually hold you back. Remember one time, Kristin,
Right.
you and I discussed this. I changed a very brief sentence in my and it changed my whole management career. I used to say, "Can you finish this project tomorrow by noon?" And all I did, because we know they can, they are hired to do that. You're
Yeah.
basically saying, do you have the ability? All I did
Right.
was change my emails. I would say, please, finish this project by noon tomorrow. Let me know if you have any questions.
Right.
I promise you, it was like someone turned the light on. And I was surprised. I go to all these trainings and no one told me that. Like, just say, please do it. I didn't give them a choice. I'm using pleasantries, but get it done.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. All these light bulbs are going off because I would love to do an episode on written communications because my form of written communication, especially like before working one-on-one with executives for 5 years and then after, you realize how they communicate and you start adapting and it's way more efficient. So I think that would be a great, if you want to add that onto the list that we just put
By the
other
way,
episode
you
on.
are seeing the art of delegation, folks. You're seeing Kristin delegate.
You already have a list going.
Listen, I do all the work. Kristin
Since
is
you
delegating.
already have a list going, Ron, do you think you could?
Did you notice there was no hedgers? Just like, I'm kidding.
That was funny.
I would love to. I would love to do it. Thanks for the demo, Kristin.
You're so welcome.
You think you could possibly do it next time? I was reading my hedging.
Oh my gosh, that is too
Go
good.
ahead.
I didn't even realize I was doing it. That's so
I've already
ingrained.
said that I started off as your intern, so
Oh my
people don't expect anything else.
Oh, so great.
I think
All
you
right.
got. Yeah, let's zip through
Yep,
these.
asking for advice. This is so good. No one is too good to ask for advice. Everyone needs help. Everyone can learn something new, right? So when you're facing a problem at work, you want to consider asking your supervisor or one of your colleagues for help. And generally, it would be a colleague who you look up to or someone who's strong in an area you may not be. And they may have experience with a similar issue and can sympathize with your problem. So never feel like you're too good or that it'll make you look bad. I mean, certain things may. If you're asking something, you should definitely know. But within reason, ask for advice. Otherwise, you cannot fake it through everything. I can tell you that.
Yep, that's great. The next one is set limits. And so we don't sound redundant. What I'm talking about is everyone has had times maybe when you burned out or it was too much for you.
Yeah.
Remember that and understand that you reached your limit. So if you do have a big project, like Kristin said, you might need to ask the company, your manager, for additional resources, additional assistance. That's a boundary also, that I'm not going to allow myself to get burned out again. I've got my limit,
Right.
so I'm going to take the measures necessary so that doesn't happen again.
Right. Another one, establishing a clear schedule. We touched on this earlier during work hours, right? But to establish a clear working schedule and share this with your colleagues and your employees, right? So, and this can be a meeting with your supervisor to discuss the best hours for you to work in order to meet your goals, right? You want to involve, when you're setting a clear schedule, this needs to be something where you're involving, if you're in leadership, your boss, everyone has a boss, right? But then if you're in leadership, you need to involve your staff so that they understand your schedule. And you may get pushback on it. We've talked about folks that maybe their team is there until 5 and they're taking off at 4. Hopefully they're coming in early and the team knows that, right? So there's all sorts of things here that need to be worked out, but establishing a clear schedule will clear the cobwebs out of the mind. I can tell you that much.
I'm always amazed, Chris, at how many parallels there are between parenting and being a leader or manager at work. So this one, you recognize your own emotions. We've already talked about don't allow someone else to bring their negative emotions into your space and you embrace it, but you got to recognize your own emotions. And you did it in New York, not to repeat the story, but you realized I'm getting negative here. And then what happened? Your son became negative, and it really does spread.
Not a proud moment, right?
Yeah.
As
and
a
if
parent.
you allow it, negativity will spread like a wildfire. So recognize your own emotions and do whatever you need to do. If you need to take a walk, do something. If you don't have that great emotional control, but compartmentalize that and do not spew out on everyone else. Amen.
No. Amen. Can I get an amen? All right. Another thing is be honest. I feel like I'm guilty of maybe being too honest in some scenarios, but I think when you're setting boundaries, you want to be honest with others about your intentions and the reasoning behind it. And, this will help other professionals and folks you work with understand your boundaries better and even help you maintain them. So be honest with your supervisor about your concerns. I know when I got hired for my latest role at the bank, the one I spent the last 5 years in, I was like, look, I cannot leave my house until my husband worked graveyard. I cannot leave my house to go to the office until 8 a.m. I can work from home in the morning, but I cannot leave until that. And that was during the interview process, right? So I was really honest about my slightly restricted schedule in the morning, and they hired me regardless. So, but if it would have been a surprise and I wasn't honest, then that would have been a big negative, right? So it just shows how important that piece is.
The next one's build professional relationships. And all of these, by the way, marry up with our 3 categories. The professional relationships, you have to say to yourself, maybe you did move across the country and we gave you some grace there, but you still have to remind yourself that I work with these people. I may end up competing for a promotion, and I don't want to get too close because it's going to have a negative impact on the company, on my relationship with other people. So again, help make yourself build relationships outside of work. Maintain a professional distance with your peers and your managers.
Yeah, I think that's great. And another one, respect others. And so it's important to respect other professionals' boundaries while you're setting your own, and really learning what boundaries your supervisor and colleagues set for themselves, and then respecting that. And that encourages them to do the same for you. And this overall practice, it creates a safe work environment. Everyone is wired so differently. And so you do want to take the time to understand what makes someone tick. And it's all going to be much more harmonious if you do that. Another one here, establish boundaries at home. And, we talk a lot about the workplace, but a lot of it spills over into the home, into your home life. And so it's important to establish and follow your boundaries that you've set at home also, just like you would at work. And that might mean maybe you have an expectation of leaving all work-related tools at your office. I know that's not as easy to do as I'm saying here, but leaving some stuff at the office that enables you to say, okay, I don't have, say, my laptop right here, so I can just get in and start working on emails. Or, there's things you can do to help yourself along with the boundaries at home. Maybe you don't talk about work at home. So all sorts of stuff you can do there, but it's just as important to set boundaries at home.
That's exactly right. Prepare. This is a biggie. If you are a boundary setter, prepare for confrontation. We've said this a lot. We could do a lot on, we could do an episode on confrontation, but at least hear this. If you've set boundaries and someone keeps violating those boundaries, you need to be prepared for that ahead of time, because if you don't prepare, you might get emotional or you might get timid. So have a cool, calm, and collected conversation. I've noticed that you've asked me to do this multiple times. Be very clear, use eye contact. Don't get emotional. Don't lift your voice. I explained to you that I can't take on more responsibilities. So I'm not going to be able to do that. And I would appreciate it next time if you don't ask me to do this. Be very cool and calm. I've always said this. I've done social media posts on this. Most conflicts can be settled with one honest conversation. But when you say it that way, even if they say, well, I need your help, I always call that background noise. Don't accept the noise. Just say, no, I explained my position. I'm not going to be able to do that.
Right.
And you can use your hand contact or whatever, but you're done. You've settled this. There is no more negotiation. It's like the other night, you were just glad to get a rental car. You could try anything you wanted. You were lucky to get a rental car.
Right.
You let people know, I'm not opening this up for debate, rebuttal, or anything else. no, I'm not going to be able to do that. And please don't ask me to do that in the future. That's
Right.
an ending. That's a concluding sentence.
Right.
And
Right.
it
I
will
like
work
that a
for you.
lot.
All right.
Can you imagine after 2 hours of waiting for me to say, I would like you to upgrade me to an SUV?
Kristin, I
Oh,
said this before, and I hope people don't think I'm being boastful, but one of my brightest moments was over a rental car. Had poured the rain. I couldn't get a flight because they were
oh.
talking about a hurricane in Charleston. So I'm stuck in Charlotte. It's only 3 hours away. I called my assistant. I said, just book me a room. I'm going to stay in Charlotte, get a rental car and drive home. The luggage bin is broken.
Oh my
It is
gosh.
so crowded in the Charlotte airport. Like you could barely move because everyone is at one carousel waiting on their luggage.
Oh my
I
goodness.
finally, when my luggage came through, it's soaking wet. They must have left it sit
Wow.
outside.
Jeez.
There was a huge long line to get a rental car. And I'm standing there, and this guy comes up and nudges me, and he says, "Are you Ron Ward?" And I said, "Yes." And I was wearing glasses, Kristin. I wear glasses a little more now, but not often. And I went, "Yes." I was in a horrible mood. I wanted to kill someone.
Yeah.
I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Hey, you don't know me, but I'm a U.S. probation officer. I follow you on LinkedIn. I'm newly hired, and I just want to say hello to you." And I said,
Aw.
"Wow, thank you so much." And I shook his hand. Of course, I asked him questions and
Yeah.
all of that. Then I was doing what you did. I was like, "Oh my God, I got to check my attitude." That was so great.
Right.
Then he
Right.
walks over and brings me a challenge coin. He said, "Hey, I forgot. I wanted you to have one of these. Do you have one from like the Eastern District of North Carolina?" I said, "No, I don't." And he brought me that coin. And I'm telling you, Kristin, I
Aw.
was in the best mood. I stood in that big long line to get a rental car. There was no upgrade on that one either. And,
That's an
yeah,
amazing story. It's wild how you can be in the worst mood and then someone's act of kindness can just
it's amazing.
completely 180 that.
Hey,
I love
Kristin,
that story.
I
Yes.
think we're going to make it to an end. I got a coaching call
Yeah,
coming
let's
up.
do it.
I just
That's
got a reminder.
exciting. I love it. I love it. All right.
Do you want to take us
So
home?
yeah, I can take us home. I think, something that's important, and I have it on one of the last ones here, is practice saying no. And if you want to go back and listen to episode 17, it's called The One Word That Will Change Your Life. And it's all about the power of
Yeah,
saying no. And I know that this is something I mentioned earlier. I am a nice person, and I'm finding that every year I grow wiser in setting boundaries and being able to say no to things. I know you have also, Ron, say no to things that we truly don't feel is a value add to us or a good use of our time. And that is okay. So it's important to understand how to say no politely in work situations. It allows you to maintain those boundaries we've spoken a lot about today. And, a lot of people actually find this quite difficult. So just try to remember that it is acceptable to decline some requests, even if it's work related. Say they're all going to karaoke or they're all going bowling. It is okay to say
that's
no to
right.
some of that
That's
stuff.
exactly right.
So
Hey guys,
that's
we
my
want to hear
out.
your boundary journey. If you're setting
Yes.
boundaries, if you were inspired by this episode, please DM Kristin and I, or post it in one of our groups. But we want to hear from you. And we are so grateful that you're on this journey with us. And we hope this episode helps you. And again, we hope you had a great 4th of July. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.